Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. I hope you are doing well. Thank you for attending today's event. We are going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about solving the SIEM problem, a hard reset on legacy solutions. I do have two special guests that will be joining us. First off, we've got Zuri Cortez and Seth Geftick, and both are with Huntress. They'll be joining us today. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself, Dan?
I'm doing awesome. And there's Seth.
Yeah, doing well. Well done on my last name. No panic. You got it right. Nice job.
Yeah, I try my best. When you have a last name of Tomaszewski, you really need to try hard to make sure that you get everybody's names right. I don't always succeed, but I try my best. So
well done.
We're here today to talk about a very important topic. Many MSPs struggle with too much noise coming from their IT client environments. There's also a huge desire to step up their security game. First and foremost, to differentiate themselves from the competition, but more so, there is so much demand on MSPs on the security side, ensuring, we have compliance, we've got insurance. There's just so many aspects of security with compliance and governance that we need to step up that game. And so today we're going to do that deep dive in how a managed SIEM solution can help filter through that noise without compromising security, allowing you to strengthen your security operation, and most importantly, being able to do this without having to add additional staff, and which is kind of a critical area. So, gentlemen, let's. You guys ready to kick things off?
We're ready to go.
Let's go. There we got our slide there. Perfect.
All right. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining. We're excited to talk to you all about SIEM today. So we've had this conversation a lot recently. It was like, well, why are we talking about SIEM? And what we find is that the audiences we're talking to either are people who have tried buying the SIEM in the past and were like, either this is too complicated or too expensive and just couldn't get value out of it, and are looking for something different, to a group of people who said, I know I need a SIEM. Maybe my insurer's telling me, cyber insurer's telling me I need a SIEM, or just my peers are saying SIEM is part of our stack and we need to do that to keep ourselves and our customers protected, and have struggled to really understand the marketplace, what options are out there, and find something that really fit. So what we want to walk you through today is a little bit of the history, like how we got here. We find that it's helpful to know why SIEM came about in the first place in order to understand really why we're talking about SIEM at all. So it's not a new solution in the marketplace. We're going to talk about some of the problems that SMBs historically have had with SIEM. And then also get into a little bit of the Huntress solution, right? We have a new approach to SIEM. The reason we say a hard reset on legacy solutions is because we've looked at what historically SIEM vendors have done, and not knocking them. I think they've done well for the audience that they've built their products for, but they haven't built them for MSPs, and that's become blatantly obvious to both us and to MSPs alike. So go ahead and Great. So there we go. Let's flip through some of these slides here. So love to know if people are familiar with SIEM. So why don't you guys tell us in the chat, the comments channel, like, hey, is this something that's new to you? Are you a SIEM user, or are you looking at SIEM for the first time? Kind of like which of these areas you're at. It'd be helpful for Zuri and I to kind of frame some of our conversation here. So as everyone go ahead.
Yeah, well, while we're looking at that, can you give us a little background as far as the maturity level of an MSP and those that have a SIEM in place?
Yeah, what we see for those who've had a SIEM in place tend to be a little bit more mature from a security mature perspective. Sure. Historically, SIEM was a tool that people have put in place to kind of be the command center for all their security data. That was the point of it, was to collect all these logs, aggregate them, and find interesting things in the data. And certainly a lot of organizations said, like, if without a SIEM, I don't really have a security command center. So I wouldn't necessarily say a SOC, because that's sort of another level of maturity. But we've seen most MSPs don't have a SIEM at all. Either they're doing some sort of open source backhanded version of a SIEM to collect logs, or they're just saying, we don't do it today. We don't collect logs at all. Sorry, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say those are pretty common place responses from an MSP, right? And you've got a bunch of disparate log sources of data that are out there. When you're dealing with your customer base, right? I mean, you've got things like firewalls and antiviruses and EDRs and WAFs and things of that nature. So it's a lot of stuff to collect, right? And so being able to centralize that into one specific platform, which would be SIEM, is really the goal there.
Yeah, and I think just to add one last point before we move on, is we take a look, and a lot of conversations we've been having about the MSP space is just the whole commodity of it, and and we have to adjust and adapt our business models to ensure that we don't become a commodity. And elevating our security is one way, as I mentioned earlier, number one, to differentiate yourself from the competition, which is important, but also, the amount of liability that we as MSPs have on our shoulders is just unbelievable. And, every client that you take on, you add more and more liability. And if you don't have all the proper policies, procedures, tools, and technologies in place, the risk to you as an MSP, it just gets greater and greater. So, putting in place, more advanced security components like a SIEM surely helps us take it to that next level and, and diminish any kind of commoditization of that.
Exactly. Cool. So let's start by talking about why SIEM exists in the first place. So we find that it's, again, helpful to understand how we got here before we start talking about where we're headed. Historically, SIEM was brought about to solve a few different problems. And Zuri, I don't know if you can advance the slides. I'm not seeing. There you go. Thank you. So SIEM was really brought out for two main problems. First, we had a problem as an industry, which is the attack surface kept growing. I'm sure you see some of these stats here and those resonate with you, which is I need visibility, but I don't have visibility. Our reach, everything we're doing is completely reactive, and we are exposed all over the place. So the problem we have is getting bigger, right? So SIEM came along and said, great, we can collect logs that give visibility to a breadth of things happening in your environment. The second problem that MSPs and organizations of really all sizes have had is what sometimes Zuri and I call the C word here, which is compliance. Sometimes can be seen as a dirty word because there's so much guidance and regulations that we have to adhere to now that it's really difficult to stay on top of it. And one of the most common ways to do that is to collect logs to prove, yes, we do have a security program in place. We are covered. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you are necessarily secure, but you have to have those minimum standards in place. So SIEM has historically been used not just from a security perspective, but a compliance perspective to collect that information. So we have security, we have compliance. How do we do it? Let's throw the kitchen sink at the problem, so to speak. And what we've seen is organizations kept generating more apps in order to collect data, in order to have an idea of what's going on in the environment. And then now we have a mo data, mo problems problem. So I know like here at Huntress, we have a little over 400 employees. I think we have well over 700 apps within our company. And so being able to keep control of all of that information is just like a fool's errand, so to speak. And I'm sure all of you have that exact same problem. So we've generated a lot of data, and now we have a sea of data that we are now drowning in, right? And so SIEM was trying to say, okay, we could help here. We have the SIEM historically and SEM categories. They merge together and basically merge security value in there, security, looking for security events within the data, and compliance, which means we're storing logs in order to prove that, yes, we have security and we meet those C-word standards that we're looking for. Right. So SIEM was born, right? And you could read the description here. Solution that helps organizations detect, analyze, and respond to security threats before they harm business operations, which you could probably argue is the same description for any product any security vendor is trying to tell you, right? So it's this very ubiquitous category where we're collecting a ton of information. The SIEM came along, and it's, kind of an OG security product. It's been around longer than EDR, XDR, MDR, all the DRs. It was the precursor of that. But it hasn't really worked, and it definitely hasn't worked for SMBs and MSPs that support them. So Zuri, I'd love for you to walk through like where SIEM is today and some of the things we're seeing there.
Yeah, I'm sure. So when you think of SIEM, right, there's really, I would say, 3 problems that it was trying to solve, right? The first one was, how do we centralize a lot of that data that's out there, right? I mentioned it earlier. When you've got lots of disparate sources of data that are kind of floating out there and an incident happens, you tend to kind of have to jump to each one of those components to really look at the data. And so what we wanted to do is kind of figure out a way to kind of centralize everything so that we're just looking at really one screen or one source of truth when it comes to the data. Obviously from that, once we've centralized the data, we're going to have threat detections, right? So being able to take that data, analyze it in a way that's effective and clean, and can kind of use things like correlations, signals, anything of that nature to really kind of make sense of the data itself, would be the second step. And then obviously the third one, which, for MSPs, I'm sure you're well aware of, right? Reporting compliance, right? Whether you're adhering to compliance standards based on your clientele and the different, potential compliance frameworks that they have, or alternatively, just needing to send up reports. I call them the "What have you done for me lately" report, right? Just saying that, here's what we've done within the last 30, 60 days, and kind of delivering on that. So I would say these are the problems that typically SIEM tried to solve. Now, with that came some problems that it created. The first one is you kind of have to do all the work, right? So if you're an MSP and you're familiar with SIEM, I would say you are familiar with this you're pretty well familiar with this. You have to do a lot of the work when it comes to SIEM, right? And that means the upkeep, the maintenance, the creating the correlation rules. If you're kind of in a DIY situation where you're doing it yourself, that requires a lot of time. And so, if you're just starting out as a smaller MSP or you've been doing this for a long time, it still is going to require a lot of time on your staff to actually have to manage and tune the SIEM itself if you're doing it yourself. Obviously, with that, you have to bring the experts, right? So I would say expertise is one of the things, either you have it or you don't, right? And there's no kind of in between there. And so if you have a SIEM expert, those people are worth their weight in gold, because typically they kind of take one of 2 paths, right? They either go down the road of what I did, was becoming a solutions engineer for a vendor, or alternatively they can just go to another kind of major corporation and become a SIEM engineer for them and kind of go from there, right? So they're hard to find, and they're hard to keep. So that expertise is sometimes lacking in the industry. And then obviously it's going to cost you, right? So when it comes to costs, the general kind of go-to for SIEM is going to be data ingested, data cost. So 183,000 is the number you're seeing there. I always joke with Seth that if I had $183,000, I'd probably buy myself a McLaren, not a SIEM. But that's just me.
I like how you say joke as if you're not 100% serious.
Yeah,
Right.
I definitely would.
Yeah.
But the goal here, right, is that these are the problems that SIEM created, right? Number one, you have to do all the work. Number 2, expertise. You got to find that and have to hold on to that. And 3, if you're not like me, you're not going to buy a McLaren. You're going to have to put that money into SIEM. That's the other problem as well. Ultimately, I would say if you could summarize the problems of SIEM and say, okay, well, what is SIEM potentially going to cause within my organization by acquisition? It's these 3 things, right? Number 1, you're gonna have to solve for complexity. It's just a complicated tool or solution if you're outsourcing. So with that is going to come a lot of the ingestion of log data, analyzing that data, making sure that that data is actually being funneled to you, understanding what type of data you want to collect from. So there's a lot of complexity that comes with that. Because it's a lot of data, then that creates noise, right? So I'm sure you folks are all too familiar with the rabbit trail of incidents and alarms that usually are surface within SIEM that you kind of have to chase down, and all to find out that it's probably not a big deal. Potentially, it could be it's something major potentially as well, but there's a lot of noise that comes with that, right? And obviously the problem with that is you don't want to train your staff to essentially ignore the SIEM, right? Where it's like, well, everything is a critical incident, so nothing is one, right? And so obviously the noise is going to come with that. And then cost. I mentioned this earlier. Most SIEM vendors out there are going to charge you by cost, which means that data coming in is going to be data that you're going to be charged for. And so when it comes to looking at how much data you actually want to bring in, yeah, it's great to bring everything under the sun and kind of collect that into SIEM, but there's going to become costs with that as well. So Seth, I'm just curious here, we kind of talked about the problems with SIEM. Maybe you can touch a little bit more on kind of why the current legacy model SIEMs have kind of failed.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we built a SIEM at Huntress is because our customers and our MSPs that we support demanded it, right? It's the number one thing we heard for several years, which is, hey, Huntress, we love you for EDR, we love you for identity protection. Can you help us with SIEM? Because we are struggling here. So we said, sure. Like after a while, we said, yep, we're comfortable enough that we're going to build this in-house. But what do you actually want from it? So we asked, we did like 400 interviews, and we asked them essentially these types of questions here. And I'd love to hear from you all. Like, why are you on this call today? Like, what is it about SIEM that is the main use case from you? Like, is it compliance? Is it threat detection? Is it incident notifications? Because we had deep conversations about all of these things here. But what we found was when we asked people, and they could select more than this, not shockingly, the number one and number really 2 and 3 options here is we need this for threat hunting and detection. We want to find incidents that go beyond just what an EDR could detect, and we want to look at it across our environment. We want a single pane of glass for our security team or our IT team, which is kind of pretty much standard of what SIEM is built for. And then the third one, which really came in a very almost second, was compliance, right? So very much going back to why SIEM was invented in the first place. We want to find threats that we might be missing, and we want to have it to prove compliance. The problem with SIEM too is like, all right, we wanted to stop security threats, but SIEMs notoriously are complex, right? Zuri talked through that, which means they're slow and they're hard to get value out of. And you compare that of how many hours it takes to run a search, correlate data, and figure out what to do with that information, how to make sense of it, how to add context to it using a SIEM. And you're so much slower than the attacker. So this is a pretty classic stat from the Verizon data breach report, where most hackers are able to get in and out and do their damage in less than 24 hours, right? So the numbers don't work. And the numbers don't work from a security perspective. They don't work from a cost perspective. They don't work from an expertise perspective. And we looked at this and said something absolutely need to change. And we can't just, when we set out to build a SIEM, like we are not out to build another Splunk. If you want to buy a Splunk or a large SIEM, there are plenty of well-established vendors out there who will happily sell you a very expensive SIEM product. We wanted to reimagine the way SIEM is done and do a reset on what people's viewpoint of the SIEM marketplace is, which brings us to what Huntress Managed SIEM is. So Zuri, why don't you walk us through what the actual offering is here?
Yeah, sure. So Seth stole a little bit of my thunder, as he likes to do.
My job.
He hit the nail on the head, right? What we didn't want to do is create another SIEM, right? I mean, if, like you said, if you want just a SIEM, kind of generic, you can do a quick Google search. You can find plenty of them. The goal wasn't really to create just another SIEM. It was really to kind of figure out what do our partners actually need in a SIEM and what's important to them. And, you saw the survey results from earlier and kind of the top 3. And so what we did is we took that concept of, we want some threat detections. We want something for compliance. We want something that's going to be a kind of single pane of glass and make it simple. And then this is what we came up with, right? There's really 3 core areas that we tackled, right? One was addressing the complexity. Second was addressing the noise, and then third was addressing the cost. Obviously it's going to be fully managed. So the goal here is not just to kind of hand you a tool and say, okay, well, good luck, and let us know if you need anything, right? It's going to really to partner with you, right? I mean, as an MSP, what we want to do is not just be another vendor, but we actually want to partner with you in tandem when it comes to cybersecurity, and really kind of tackle these 3 components within the SIEM platform. So starting from the top here, smart filtering. This is something that we looked at to address part of complexity and part of noise. And what I mean by that is typically the goal of SIEM, as we talked about, was collection of data. However, what we found was when we were talking to our partners, a lot of them said, there's got to be a better way as far as the data collecting that we have. Can we consolidate that data, or can we make it a little bit cleaner when it comes to what we're actually collecting? So we thought about that and said, well, most, I would say, SIEM vendors right now, we do what's called tuning, right? So you collect all the data, and then from there, you're going to essentially tune out some of the noise, tune out some of the potential things that maybe don't match the correlation signatures or that overly match, and then be able to kind of build detections from there. We said, well, why can't we just do it in the inverse, right? So why don't we just essentially filter a lot of the data that's needless from the start, that way creating some, much complete subsets of data when it comes to security events specifically, and kind of omit a lot of that noise that potentially isn't really necessarily needed. So that's really kind of how smart filtering began, right? As we started to look at the different events that are out there and say, is this event potentially something that's needed or not? Perfect example of that would be, for example, I'll pick on Seth here because he's our VP and that's what I do. Every time Seth logs in, there's an event that's created that says, Seth's grouping is, obviously he's probably in the executive leadership, he's in the marketing department, he's in the marketing leadership department, and whatever other groups he's in. So that event, while in and of itself is fine, the question has to be asked, is that something that potentially we need to store long term? Now, if Seth went from being a regular user to domain admin, yeah, that's probably something that's of concern. Believe me, I would be concerned. So from there, what we want to do is really kind of make sure that those kind of security events are logged, but not necessarily kind of the events not necessary, right? An event of what groups Seth belongs to in and of itself, probably not too critical. There's other ways to look at that event, right? Like Seth moving from a regular user to domain admin, right? There's other ways to do that, but that kind of is a good example of something that we would filter out and kind of be able to omit and kind of not have to deal with long term, right? So to kind of give you a better kind of visual of what this looks like, if you look at this mapping here, everything in red is what you would see is typically things that you would have collected on a normal day-to-day SIEM. Green is actually the post-filtering of events that have happened. We're just tailoring the security events. So if you took this and just thought about the cost, if you have SIEM now, and you thought about the costs that you're being charged if it's data ingested currently, and you compared the red to the green, obviously it's very clear right away that you're going to be saving quite a bit of money just by omitting a lot of kind of the traffic that's out there that potentially isn't needed there. Seth, any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, this is like, if you're sitting there and listening to this and like, so what? Doesn't everyone do this? Actually, almost no one does this, right? So the way smart filtering works is usually SIEMs collect every piece of information they possibly can find, as Zuri said. They then charge you for that information. And then that's so overwhelming and complex. On the back end, they tune it out and they get rid of the data then. So the vendors are incented to collect everything because they charge based on that. Right. We looked at it and said, this isn't really helpful information. Why do we want to collect this and jack up the price of our product? And MSPs, that's not really their business model. So smart filtering was a very simple concept that completely changed the game when it comes to SIEM.
Yeah. In fact, that's what I was going to say is, this has got to be a game changer for MSPs that, have known that they need to add a SIEM, but have been reluctant because of the amount of, the cost associated with all the noise coming through. And let's face it, you've got enough noise if you're, going through and you've got a variety of monitoring sets within your RMM, you've got a large amount of noise there that, over time, those MSPs have, either identified ways to be able to sift through that properly. But, when you're talking about adding even more noise, and you're thinking, we're already strapped as it is. From a staffing perspective, we don't have enough talent and, we're pulling our hair out all day long. How are we going to do this? And, you no longer can ignore it, right? Because, when it comes to, the governance and compliance, it's something that you can't just say, well, someday we'll get to it.
Yeah. And, the next question is like, well, how do you know what to filter out? Right. First of all, we're not a data collection company. We're a security company, and we're not a SIEM. We're a managed SIEM. which means that our SOC, the same SOC that manages 3 million plus endpoints and 1 million end identities for our MSP customers around the world, are the ones looking all the data here. So they are the ones who know this is the data I'm going to look at and will be helpful for me, both from a detection and investigation perspective. And this is the noise that I either will never, ever look at and sort of filter out, tune out immediately, or the odds of it being helpful are extremely limited. So we're kind of both optimizing for complexity and also optimizing for value here. So,
and where do you think we sit right now as far as going out there and trying to secure new managed accounts? If somebody's looking at a couple different MSPs, one has a SIEM, one doesn't. Are we at that point right now where that one that has the SIEM in place is the one that's going to get the business because the client is saying, this is what we need in order to, secure our organization, manage compliance, and so on?
Yeah, I would definitely say so, right? I would say there's two factors that come into play right off the top of my head immediately, right? One is compliance, the other one is cyber insurance. And we're seeing the rise of those two things significantly. If you're, we call it the C word, like Seth said, but if compliance is not a factor, chances are you probably are going to be looking at cyber insurance potentially itself as well, right? And one of the requirements for cyber insurance is you must have a way to consolidate data, have someone look at it, and then notify someone from that, right? So, an MSP that has SIEM is going to be much more lucrative and attractive to that potential buyer that's looking to actually add a cyber insurance as well.
Yeah. And we're transitioning to that point where, you either step up your security game or you need to move out of the way. I truly believe that that's what we're facing. If not now, very, very close down the road here.
Absolutely. So I would say if there's a hype slide, this is it. And the reason why is because the way we built our SIEM is in layers. And what I mean by that is MSPs, I mentioned it a little bit a while ago, they needed a way to consolidate data and for two reasons. One, to kind of aggregate data into one location. And then what we saw from our partner base specifically at Huntress was compliance just kept coming up over and over and over. And we didn't have really a way to address that. Obviously, we have the EDR, we have ITDR, and we have security awareness training, but there was no way to kind of store data long term. And so really that's one of the main reasons why we had to move in the direction of SIEM. Now, once that was established, which is now, the next step was then taking the data that we're seeing there through the smart filtering and saying, okay, from now that we've got a good subset of data and we're storing it for compliance, now let's build threat detections on top of that. And so you see the coming soon marker there. Coming soon is actually by end of this month, early next month. So it's not something that's like, years away. It's something that's coming relatively soon. We've been building those as capabilities specific to things that are pretty pertinent out in the market right now, right? Things like potential brute force attacks, things like firewall detections. Those are going to be things that we're going to be building over time. And so as we've now settled on these are the subsets of data that we can collect from, and this is how we adhere to compliance. Threat detection is something that we're rapidly moving towards and being able to address that, obviously tying into the SOC at Huntress, and then being able to do that in 24/7 format. And then follow the sun model as well. I think we've got 3 SOCs, one in the US, one in the UK, and then one in Australia. So, we do that follow the sun model.
And it's worth noting that, everything we do at Huntress is managed. So the threat hunting is part of the standard offering. That's not an additional cost for us to do threat hunting. That's just something that we will do for everyone.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about a game changer, we mentioned that MSPs are often strapped on the talent side. This truly becomes an extension of their team, and allows them to have additional staff without having additional staff, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, that's part of our general principle is like with everything we do, you don't have to bring expertise to it. The expertise is built in, and they're real humans we're talking about here. This isn't all just AI models that we're doing to do the work for. Like we have our SOC is human led. So a human will look at almost every alert we send to you and validate it and does the investigations as well. But when it comes to SIEM, the expertise is a two-edged sword, because first you need experts who know SIEM tools. And as Zuri was talking about before, there's a whole group of people who've built their career of experts on one particular type of SIEM because they are so complex to use. And then on top of it, you need experts who are security experts, which we all know are, it's not a newsflash. They're hard to find, and hard to retain. And then even if you can, they're extremely expensive on top of it. So luckily our SOC, we have a 24/7 SOC that's sort of seen it all and stopped it all. And, that's something you don't have to worry about as the MSP. Like, let the security experts be the security experts, and you are the experts of your business. And we partner together to make sure we're helping your customers.
Exactly. Dan, you mentioned this earlier, speaking to compliance itself. Compliance is really the third factor here when it comes to how we're addressing things. I mentioned just not too long ago that we built on the mindset of a compliance-first framework of being able to adhere to those regulations and mandates when it came to the storage of log data, whether it's long-term storage or short-term storage, and then being able to collect effectively to adhere to those different requirements, right? So when it comes to compliance, I would say standard for most compliance, not all of them, but I think HIPAA comes to mind as not one of them. But for the most part, most of them will require at least 1 year of log retention. For those like HIPAA that are like 6-7 years, or SOC 2, which is about 2 to 3, we have the ability to export the data back out, so you can store that wherever you want. As a future capability, we'll have the ability to store the data for longer periods than 1 year, but as of right now, it's a 1 year storage. Obviously, the data is going to be fully encrypted, whether it's in transit back to us or at rest. So we encrypt the data in both ways. We do 30 days hot storage as well. So that's 30 days hot, indexed, searchable, however you understand that term, where you can actually go into the UI, look at the data, pull up records, analyze that data, do searches on it, and kind of go from there. So that's always available. The UI is super simple to use. I know it's probably a little bit small, but that's actually a screenshot of the UI itself as well. And it's really easy to use, right? If you're familiar with like SQL search queries, you can use that. We're potentially looking at making that even simpler, but for right now, if you're comfortable with SQL, you can just plug in and go. And then of course, compliance mapping to those different requirements that are out there that are pretty commonly seen, right? Things like HIPAA and PCI and SOC 2 and so forth are things that we really kind of want to map to. I would say if there's one point you take away, this is it, right? This would be the I would say elevator pitch slide of Huntress Managed SIEM here. Everything you see on the right is really the benefits you're getting from our SIEM, right? We're trying to eliminate the complexity of SIEM, right? We get it. SIEM is a super complex tool or solution that requires a lot of manpower and a lot of time and expense to actually manage. And so, by us managing that platform, we're eliminating a lot of that complexity through the smart filtering. We're capturing the data that really is going to be specific to you folks and what actually matters as far as that collection of data. At the end of the day, right, our goal is to stop hackers, right? Whether you're looking at the EDR component, the ITDR, you're looking at SIEM, or just looking at security awareness training, the end goal is always the same. It's stop hackers. That's the Huntress goal, and it always will be, right? Seth hit the nail on the head. We're a security-first company. We want to make sure that we adhere to the compliance mandates and be able to kind of address those and assist with them as much as possible. And then predictable pricing is one thing that we've kind of alluded to throughout the whole presentation, and we'll touch on a little bit further here shortly. These are the three, I would say, highlights of the platform, right? Like I said, it's going to be fully managed. The smart filtering engine is going to be there, and predictive pricing. So Seth, why don't you go a little bit deeper into the predictive pricing aspect?
Yeah, so when we did those 400 interviews with folks before we built our product, obviously costs came up. Like, hey, we're looking at SIEM. SIEM's expensive. Can you build one that gives us the value we need in terms of efficacy, but is something we could actually afford? But the second thing that came up with pricing was just make it predictable. So I know no one likes that call from their vendor that says, hey, by the way, you used your extra data this month, so here's your bill, here's your surprise charge, right? People would rather pay more all the time than get the overage. I'm sure you have that same issue with your cell phone, right? Like, you kind of go with the unlimited plan just because there's nothing more stressful than when you like lose your power for a week, like because a hurricane hit, like speaking from personal experience, and suddenly you're like, oh, look at all the data I just used. Thank you for that $400 bill that I was not expecting. SIEM vendors are notorious for this. You have a noisy data source, you have a noisy user, and suddenly, boop, you had a big day, they're out of data, here's your overage bill. So in addition to making it a good value, people just said, please tell me what you're going to charge me, and just charge me that and keep that consistent week over week, month over month. And that's how we design this. So I know we get a lot of questions about pricing. We're going to go ahead and actually show you the pricing at some point here, because it is what it is. So we're happy just to not make you call someone and look at it. So we'll pop that up.
And I just wanted to throw out, that predictive pricing. I do like that analogy that you threw out as far as cell phones. I'm old enough to remember when, you signed up for a cellular carrier and you might get 100 minutes a month, and you're like, oh, wow, I went over by so much and I've got this extra cost, and that unpredictability is scary, right? Because you're trying, number one, as an MSP, we try to, provide predictable pricing for our clients, right? Like an all-in seat price. And, the last thing that they want to do is see, some increase in their costs. And, and the last thing we want to do is, if we're providing predictable pricing, that our margins are going to fluctuate and go up and down based on, what some of those costs could be. So I think that is truly key when it comes to that.
Yeah. And what's more frustrating is, like, you have these fluctuation in prices, and then there's vendors who try to solve that problem by cutting you off. So there's vendors out there who are like, oh, you get X amount of gigabytes a day, and then at 8 p.m. you ran out of data. Guess what? The SIEM's just going to stop collecting data at this point.
Right.
And you're fine for those hours, which is like it's like your cell phone won't work because you've talked for 3 hours and you only paid for 3 hours. And like, that doesn't make any sense either. So, so designing the pricing was actually one of the most complicated parts of the process here, but we came up with a way that for 99.9% of you out there, whatever we tell you the price is, you're not going to go over your data limits, because we've built it so you won't go over, and the price will be exactly what we tell you it's going to be. Very predictable.
Besides, it cuts into the McLaren budget, so you can't have that.
Can't have that. Can't have that.
Exactly.
So, I mean, now's a great time to take it for test drive, right? I mean, there's never been a better time to get into SIEM. We're seeing kind of a renaissance of SIEM. SIEM is not a new technology by any stretch of the imagination. It started almost about 20 years ago, and it's kind of had its moment and kind of declined. MDR kind of began to surface, and all the, like Seth said, all the DRs. And now with the advent of compliance and cyber insurance, we're starting to see this kind of resurgence of SIEM starting to surface again. And so, like I mentioned, jump in and kind of give the trial a test run. I think we're running some sort of promo, Seth. What was the promo again?
Yeah. So our goal is to not have any of you ever go over your data. So we wanted to make sure that so the way we charge is by data source, and then every data source you get 10 gigs of data for that data source. So we said, if you sign up for this product by the end of the year, we're going to double the data source to 20 gigs. Since the product's relatively new, we know there might be some outlier cases where some people might have a noisy environment that we maybe didn't filter it as deeply as we wanted to. We don't want anyone to go over. So until the end of the year, we're doubling the amount of storage that everyone has, right? So that's a great incentive to sign up for the other year. And then the other thing to note here is, when it comes to data, that is cumulative. So it's not per day. It's almost like a rolling. So if you remember old school cell phone plans, when you had leftover minutes, they rolled over to the next month. It's very similar here. So you don't lose your data at the end of the month. It stays cumulative. So okay. Yeah. And the other thing too, is it's all your tenants together. So if you have 100 customers and one of them is noisy and 99 are quiet, it'll all even itself out. It's not an issue. And then the other thing is, what happens in the 1% of cases that someone is well, we did go over our data. I think of our 400 test cases, 2 people went over our allotment, and that was at the 10 gigs limit. And that was before our filtering was really optimized. So it should be extremely rare situation. We do like a first in, first out model. So like if we collect a year's worth of data, we don't stop collecting it. We just prune the data or truncate the data at the back end. So we'll keep 11 and a half months worth of storage just to save the money in the end. So we'll keep the 30 days of hot storage always. And our goal is to keep the 1 year of cold storage, and eventually we'll add more long-term storage options. And then you might just have 11 and a half or 11 months and 25 days if you go slightly over at that point. But again, that should be an extremely rare case and shouldn't really affect many people here. So
let me ask this question. You mentioned about being able to filter out some of the data. Obviously, there's some data that is not going to have an impact on the end result of the security of the client. But also, are there other ways that data, the amount of data and that are actually more the amount of that noise can be diminished or reduced? Maybe from a configuration perspective of those devices, does that come into play as well, or not necessarily?
Yeah, so the agent is tuned and configured to address those kind of concerns, right? So a good example of that would be like the firewall, right? Let's say we set the firewall to its highest level of aggregation, right? I mean, that's going to be a ton of data. And
Sure.
so what we want to do, for example, is maybe set it to informational, where it's a lot less, and maybe it's only going to kind of give the critical information that we would necessarily need to actually make sense of and create security events from that. So, I mean, there's a couple of different ways, right? The agent would be configured in a way to kind of address that, but also what we want to do is make sure that we work with our partners and with your customers as well to make sure that we're adjusting for those levels of noise so that we're not getting excessive amounts of data as well.
Excellent.
If that all sounds complicated, that's why SIEMs take 6 months to roll out. Is because you have to tune all that on the back end. With us, we pretty much take care of all that up front, and it works as soon as you roll it out, which is a very quick process, as you'd see in the trial.
So Dan, I know we've been talking for, I don't know if you had any questions for us.
No, I mean, I think you guys have done a great job of presenting it. I mean, I think the things that the key points that we wanted to get across, that I wanted to get across to our audience, is that first and foremost, now is the time to truly embrace looking at your security stack. I mean, we should be reviewing our security stacks on a regular basis first and foremost, because what worked yesterday isn't necessarily what's going to work today, and we need to continue to up the game. Again, it's more about there is one aspect, of course, differentiating yourself from the competition, which can go a long way, because if you are up against another provider and they're not providing any kind of SIEM, and you are, I mean, that's one huge way that you can help to to win that business. But also the other thing is just that liability that MSPs have on their shoulders. I truly believe that there are some MSPs out there that don't fully comprehend the amount of liability that is on their shoulder. And many do, but there are some that don't. And we need to bring that to light, because, we want everybody to succeed. In order to succeed, you have to make sure that you've got, your client's back, but you got to make sure you got your own back. And if you don't, you've got a house of cards, you're so close to disaster. And we want to make sure that you are protecting your clients and you've got the right tools in place, but also you're partnering with somebody that can give you or provide you an extension to your team, because we all know there's only so many hours in the day. And our budgets, as far as you mentioned someone that has that SIEM experience, to bring somebody on into your own MSP that has that SIEM experience is costly, very costly. And what we're doing here when we look at this is, we're doing similar to what we're asking our clients to do. We're asking them to outsource it to somebody that's their core, that's their wheelhouse, and focusing on that. And by partnering with Huntress in providing a managed SIEM solution, that allows us to elevate and truly provide a much better service for our clients.
Yeah. So you had mentioned not just protecting your customers, but protecting yourself. One thing we failed to mention is we have a program here. You can look it up called Huntress Neighborhood Watch Program. So for all of our products, we will allow MSPs to use them internally for your own MSP, not for your customers, but for your house for free with no catch, right? Just something we do for the community. Like obviously it's a benefit to us because we get to showcase how good our products are and our services. For you, it's a benefit because you can feel confident, like knowing our 24/7 SOC is watching your MSP. And then, that gives you the confidence knowing that when your customers use it, it's going to work as well. So that's this Huntress Neighborhood Watch Program. And then one other thing, I know the number one question we get is always about the pricing. So our sales team hates when we do this because they want you to call them and talk about pricing over the phone. But Zuri was nice enough to put just our pricing slide in here just so you could actually see it. So this is the list pricing. So this is what you would charge your customers, not counting like the 50% margin that you would have on top of it. So again, the way the pricing works is by number of data sources. The promotion is that 20 gigs a month instead of 10 gigs a month. And again, that aggregates over the year. So it's not like if you go over 1 month and under 1 month, that would average each other out, for example. And it is at the account level. So you could aggregate the total number of data sources, and then we truncate it in the rare case that you go over your data limit here. So compare this to like what a large SIEM provider would charge you, and it's really night and day. So hopefully that's helpful and saves you a phone call, but we want you to call us anyway. But if you don't want to talk to us, at least you can see the pricing on the screen. So.
And oddly, I got a question that just came in via my text. So someone watching that has my phone number. The question is it the same interface? So if they're saying if we're a Huntress partner currently, and we log into our current Huntress portal and we add SIEM, is this going to be all under the same dashboard?
Yep. So on the left-hand side column, you're going to see anything that you currently have, right? If you've got EDR, ITDR, it'll be on the left-hand side. And so once you have SIEM, you actually see that pop up, and then it'll just be a drop-down, but it's still the same UI.
Yeah, okay. If you're an EDR customer, it's actually, you don't even need a new agent. It's the same agent. So it's exactly. You just flag it on.
Oh, that makes life even easier then, right? Yeah. Excellent. Any parting words from you, gentlemen?
So I think Dan, you did a great job of helping us explain why MSPs need SIEM and how it'll help your business. We hope you look at ours, but even if not, it's something that I think all MSPs have to start considering today as part of their security offering. Because without it, you have both a blind spot from security perspective and a blind spot from a compliance perspective.
Excellent. And for anybody wanting to learn more about the Huntress SIEM solution, of course, you can go to huntress.io.
Huntress.com, that's actually, yeah. Okay. Huntress.io is our user portal. You got to be a customer to see that. So yeah, Huntress.io. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you for that correction. And then additionally, if you are on the Everything MSP website, you can search Huntress. You can get some additional information about Huntress there. You can schedule time with them, send a message to them directly from that site as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
If there's anything you need from us, just reach out. You can find Zuri and I on LinkedIn directly. That's certainly the only Seth Geftic on there. Be happy to answer your questions. We're here to help the community. So we have a lot of other great community resources that cost nothing, like Tradecraft Tuesday every month. No sales pitches, just things to help MSPs get smarter about their business and learn about what hackers are doing to mess it up. So
there we go. Seth and Zuri, thank you so much for your time and knowledge today. For our audience listening, thank you for listening to us here. The replay is going to be available, or will be available right away on our YouTube channel, the Everything MSP YouTube channel. So please share this with your colleagues, other people within your organization. And with that being said, until next time, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.